For decades, countless crimes sat unsolved, locked away in police files marked cold. Investigators followed every lead they could, interviewed every witness, and searched for answers that never came. Families were told there was nothing more that could be done. The killers believed time had protected them. But science never stops evolving. DNA, once useless or misunderstood, slowly became the most powerful voice for the dead. These are the cold cases that were finally solved, not by luck, but by new DNA technology that gave the past a second chance to speak. In the early days of criminal investigation, DNA testing barely existed. Evidence like blood, hair, and skin cells was collected, but often could not be analyzed properly. Years later, those same samples became priceless. What once sat silently in evidence lockers would eventually identify killers who believed they were safe forever. In 1978, 8-year-old April Tinsley was kidnapped and murdered in Indiana. Her killer escaped, but he continued to haunt the community by sending threatening letters for years. Police had DNA evidence but no way to identify the suspect. The case went cold for 4 decades. In 2018, forensic genealogy was used for the first time in Indiana. Investigators uploaded DNA from the crime scene to a public genealogy database. The results led them to a man who had lived a quiet life for 40 years. He confessed, and after decades of fear, justice finally arrived. In 1980, 16-year-old Carla Walker was abducted from a car while on a date in Texas. Her boyfriend survived, but the killer vanished. For nearly 40 years, investigators had no suspect. DNA evidence existed, but technology was too limited. In 2020, advanced DNA testing and genetic genealogy identified the killer as a former classmate. He was arrested at 60 years old. New DNA technology had finally spoken for Carla after 4 decades of silence. In 1986, Michelle Martinko was murdered in a shopping mall parking lot in Iowa. The crime shocked the community, but the case stalled. Evidence was preserved, but no match existed. In 2018, investigators used modern DNA analysis to retest samples. The results identified a man who had been a teenager at the time of the crime. After 32 years, he was convicted. Technology turned a forgotten case into a solved one. In 1974, the murder of Kathy Small remained unsolved for decades. Early forensic testing produced no results and leads faded. In 2022, new DNA testing matched evidence to a man who had lived freely for nearly 50 years. He was arrested at 69 years old. The case proved that even half-century-old evidence can still reveal the truth. In 1969, Rita Curran was murdered in her Vermont home. Investigators worked tirelessly but failed to identify her killer. The case went cold for more than 50 years. In 2023, forensic genealogy finally identified the murderer using preserved DNA. The suspect had died decades earlier, but for Rita's family, knowing the truth ended a lifetime of uncertainty. In 1983, law student Lisa Ziegert was abducted and murdered in Massachusetts. The case haunted the town for 34 years. In 2017, new DNA testing linked the crime to a local man who had escaped suspicion for decades. He was sentenced to life in prison. DNA technology turned grief into justice. In 1970, Angela Samota was brutally murdered in her Texas apartment. Despite an intense investigation, the case went cold. In 2018, DNA testing identified her killer, who had committed other violent crimes. Nearly 50 years after her death, Angela finally had justice. In 1981, a young woman was murdered, but her body was misidentified and buried under another name. Decades passed before investigators reopened the case. In 2016, DNA testing identified her remains and confirmed she had been murdered. Although the killer was never caught, DNA corrected decades of error and gave her identity back. In 1966, Beverly Yarborough was murdered in Ohio. Investigators lacked the technology to identify the suspect. Nearly 50 years later, DNA evidence finally matched a man who had lived undetected for decades. He was arrested in 2014. In 1972, Mary Jane Vanogram was murdered, and the case went cold for nearly 50 years. In 2022, DNA evidence finally identified her killer, bringing closure after decades of silence. In many of these cases, forensic genealogy became the turning point. By comparing crime scene DNA with public family tree databases, investigators could trace killers through distant relatives. a second cousin, a third cousin. A family tree slowly built backward until only one suspect remained. This technology has changed criminal investigation forever. Killers who never committed another crime, who never entered a DNA database, were suddenly exposed. The past could no longer hide behind time. For families, DNA answers bring complicated emotions, relief, anger, grief. Knowing the truth does not erase pain, but it ends the endless question of, who did this? It allows families to finally stop waiting. Some killers were already dead when DNA identified them. Some never faced a courtroom. But truth still mattered. Justice is not only about punishment, it is about answers. DNA technology has also revealed uncomfortable truths about the justice system. How many cases were dismissed too early? How many suspects were ignored? How many victims were almost forgotten? Every solved cold case is a reminder that evidence should never be thrown away. What seems useless today may become the key tomorrow. As technology continues to evolve, more cold cases will speak. More killers will be exposed. More families will finally receive answers they waited decades to hear. As we reach the end of today's journey, remember that DNA does not forget. It waits. It survives fires, floods, and time itself, and when science is ready, it tells the truth. Thank you for watching. If you believe in justice, science, and the power of truth, like the video, share it, and subscribe. Because no matter how long it takes, DNA always remembers.